What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks onto a morning show set and faces the most disrespectful interview of his entire career? In just 33 seconds of one comment, a beloved host reveals his true colors and ignites a confrontation that would shake the entire studio to its core. Samuel L. Jackson arrived that morning ready to discuss his latest project. He was relaxed, smiling, and completely unaware that he was about to experience something that would leave the entire crew speechless. The veteran actor had done thousands of interviews over his decades-long career. He had handled tough questions, awkward moments, and everything in between with grace and professionalism. But nothing could have prepared him for what Michael Strahan was about to unleash. The interview started normally enough. Samuel sat down on the familiar couch, adjusted his microphone, and exchanged pleasantries with Michael. The cameras were rolling, the audience was watching, and everything seemed perfectly routine. But there was something different in Michael's demeanor that morning. Something that Samuel would pick up on within the first few minutes. "So, Samuel, thanks for joining us today," Michael began, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I have to say, I'm surprised you had time to fit us into your schedule." Samuel laughed it off, thinking it was just playful banter. "Hey man, I always make time for Good Morning America. You know that." But Michael's expression didn't soften. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with an air of superiority that immediately changed the atmosphere in the studio. Right. Because you've been doing, what, 3 movies a year for the past decade? Some people might call that oversaturation." The word hung in the air like a slap. Samuel's smile faltered for just a moment. The crew members behind the cameras exchanged uncomfortable glances. This wasn't the friendly morning show interview anyone had expected. "Oversaturation?" Samuel repeated, his voice calm but with an edge. "I call it working. I call it doing what I love. Is there something wrong with that?" Michael shrugged, and that shrug carried more condescension than any words could. No, nothing wrong with it. I just wonder if quality suffers when you're pumping out that much content. I mean, can every role really be that meaningful when you're taking everything that comes your way?" Samuel took a deep breath, clearly trying to maintain his composure. "Every single role I accept goes through a process. I read the script, I talk to the director, I think about what I can bring to the character. I don't just say yes to everything." "Really?" Michael's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. "Because it seems like you say yes to pretty much everything. Video games, commercials, big budget blockbusters, small indie films. Where's the selectivity?" "The selectivity is in doing what interests me," Samuel responded, his voice getting tighter. "I don't have to justify my choices to you or anyone else. I'm an actor. I act. That's what I do." Michael leaned forward, his voice dripping with false concern. "But don't you worry about your legacy? Don't you think about how people will remember you, as the guy who was in everything, or as the guy who chose quality over quantity?" The implication was clear and cutting. Michael was suggesting that Samuel's entire career was quantity over quality, that all his work, all his dedication, all his success was somehow cheapened by the fact that he worked consistently. "My legacy?" Samuel's voice dropped to a dangerous level. "Let me tell you about my legacy. I've been nominated for Academy Awards. I've won countless other awards. I've worked with directors that people dream about working with. I've created characters that people quote decades later. That's my legacy. Not some morning show host's opinion about how much I work." Michael's face hardened. "I'm not just some morning show host. I'm trying to have an honest conversation here." "Honest?" Samuel let out a short, harsh laugh. "There's nothing honest about this. You're trying to create a moment. You're trying to get a soundbite. You're trying to make yourself look tough by going after me. But all you're doing is showing everyone watching that you don't know how to conduct a professional interview." The crew behind the cameras were frozen, unsure whether they should intervene. The audience was completely silent, watching this train wreck unfold in real time. Nobody had ever seen anything like this on Good Morning America before. "I know exactly how to conduct an interview," Michael shot back, his voice rising. "And part of that is asking the tough questions that other people are afraid to ask." "Tough questions?" Samuel's eyes flashed. Tough questions are insightful. They're thought-provoking. They challenge someone in a meaningful way. What you're doing isn't tough. It's just rude. There's a difference, and you clearly don't understand that. The accusation was clear. Michael was suggesting that Samuel was just cashing checks, that his work had no integrity, that he was selling out. And he was doing it on live television with millions of people watching. Samuel sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. "Every role I take means something to me. I don't just show up for a paycheck. I never have. And I think my body of work speaks for itself." "Does it, though?" Michael shot back, and now there was no mistaking the hostility. "I've seen some of your recent stuff, and honestly, it feels like you're just going through the motions. Where's the passion? Where's the Samuel L. Jackson we all fell in love with in Pulp Fiction?" The entire studio had gone quiet. Even the audience members who usually provided ambient energy seemed frozen. Production assistants stood motionless. Camera operators kept filming, but their eyes were wide with shock. This wasn't just an awkward interview. This was a full-scale attack. "You want to talk about Pulp Fiction?" Samuel's voice was deadly calm now, the kind of calm that anyone who knew him would recognize as dangerous. "That was over 2 decades ago. I'm not that same person. I've grown. I've evolved. I've played hundreds of characters since then. But you're sitting here trying to tell me that none of it matters because you, Michael Strahan, have decided I'm not good enough anymore?" Michael actually laughed. A short, dismissive laugh that made it clear he didn't take Samuel seriously. "I'm not saying you're not good enough. I'm saying maybe you should be more selective. Maybe take a break. Maybe remember what made you special in the first place instead of just being everywhere all at once." "Being everywhere?" Samuel leaned forward, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You mean being successful? You mean working consistently? You mean building a career that's lasted longer than most people in this industry?" "I mean diluting your brand," Michael interrupted, talking over him. "I mean making it so that when people see your name on a poster, they don't get excited anymore because they know you'll be in another 3 movies next month anyway." That was the line. That was the moment where something shifted in Samuel's eyes. He wasn't just offended anymore. He was genuinely angry. And everyone in that studio could feel it. "My brand?" Samuel's voice was low and intense. "You want to talk to me about my brand? You're a morning show host who used to play football. I've been acting since before you knew what a film set looked like. I've worked with Spike Lee, Quentin Tarantino, the Coen brothers. I've built a career on talent and hard work. And you have the audacity to sit there and tell me I'm diluting my brand?" Michael's face flushed red. He clearly hadn't expected Samuel to fight back this hard. "Hey, I'm just asking the questions that people are thinking." "No, you're not," Samuel said, firmly. "You're asking the questions that you think will make you look smart. You're asking questions designed to tear me down. And the sad thing is, you don't even realize how transparent it is. Everyone watching can see exactly what you're doing." "What I'm doing?" Michael's voice cracked with indignation. "What I'm doing is my job. My job is to interview people and get real answers, not just let them come on and promote their latest project without any pushback." "Pushback is fine," Samuel said, his voice steady despite his obvious anger. "Pushback is asking me about my choices, about my process, about the challenges I face. What you're doing is attacking me. You're questioning my integrity. You're suggesting that I don't care about my work. And that's not pushback. That's just being disrespectful." "No," Samuel cut him off sharply. "You're not asking questions. You're making statements. You're passing judgment. And you're doing it from a place of incredible arrogance. Considering you're sitting in a chair that a dozen other people could fill tomorrow and nobody would notice the difference. The audience gasped. Crew members covered their mouths. This had gone from uncomfortable to explosive in a matter of seconds. Michael's voice rose, defensive and angry now. That's completely uncalled for. I'm trying to have a conversation here. A conversation? Samuel stood up, and the sudden movement made everyone jump. This isn't a conversation. You invited me here to humiliate me on live television. You wanted to tear me down, make yourself look smart or edgy or whatever you thought this would accomplish. But let me tell you something, Michael. I've been in this business too long and worked too hard to sit here and let you disrespect me like this. Michael stood up too, his face now completely red, his voice shaking with rage. Disrespect you? You just insulted me on my own show. You came into my house and... Your house? Samuel's laugh was bitter. This is a television studio owned by a network. You're an employee here just like everyone else. You don't own anything, and the fact that you think you do just proves how entitled you've become. Entitled? Michael's voice cracked. You're calling me entitled? You walk in here with your Hollywood attitude, your ego, thinking you're better than everyone. I never said I was better than anyone, Samuel interrupted, his voice cutting through Michael's rant like a knife. But I know my worth. I know what I've accomplished, and I don't need validation from someone who clearly doesn't respect what I do. Michael jabbed his finger toward Samuel. I respect plenty of actors. I respect actors who take their craft seriously, who don't just chase every paycheck that comes their way. There it is again, Samuel said, shaking his head. You keep coming back to this idea that I'm just chasing paychecks. You know nothing about my process. Nothing about why I choose the projects I choose. Nothing about the conversations I have with directors and writers. You're making assumptions based on absolutely nothing. I'm making observations based on what I see, Michael countered. And what I see is an actor who used to be selective and is now in everything. And what gives you the right to judge that? Samuel's voice rose. What gives you the authority to decide what's too much work for me? Who made you the arbiter of how many projects an actor should take? The two men were standing now, facing each other across the coffee table, the tension so thick it was suffocating. The director was frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but nobody was listening. This was television gold, and television disaster all at once. You know what your problem is? Michael pointed his finger at Samuel, his hand shaking. You can't handle criticism. You can't handle someone finally telling you the truth. You're so used to everyone kissing your feet that when someone actually challenges, you fall apart. Samuel's eyes narrowed. The truth? You think you're telling me the truth? You're projecting your own insecurities onto me. You're sitting there in your nice suit, in your comfortable chair, trying to make yourself feel important by tearing down someone who's actually earned their place in this industry. Earned your place? Michael's voice was almost a shout now. You think showing up in every Marvel movie and car commercial makes you some kind of legend? Samuel's eyes went cold. You really want to go there? You want to reduce my entire career to Marvel movies and commercials? What about the dramatic roles? What about the independent films? What about the work I do that never gets the headlines but means everything to me? Oh, please, Michael scoffed. Spare me the artist's speech. We all know why you do those big budget movies. We all know why you do those commercials. It's about the money. Of course money is part of it, Samuel said, his voice tight, with controlled fury. I have a family. I have a life. I'm not ashamed of making a living. But to suggest that's all I care about, that I don't care about the art, that I don't care about the stories I tell, that's where you're completely wrong. Then prove it, Michael challenged. Tell me the last time you turned down a role because it wasn't good enough. Tell me the last time you said no to a paycheck because you cared more about your artistic integrity. Samuel stared at him for a long moment. I don't owe you that information. I don't owe you access to my private business decisions. And the fact that you think you're entitled to that just shows how far out of line you've gone. I'm out of line? Michael's voice hit a new pitch. I'm just asking you to back up what you're saying. No, Samuel said firmly. You're trying to trap me. You're trying to make me look bad no matter what I say. If I tell you about roles I've turned down, you'll say I'm being defensive. If I don't tell you, you'll act like I have something to hide. This isn't journalism. This is a hit job. That was it. That was the final straw. Samuel grabbed his microphone and pulled it off his lapel in one swift motion. The sound guy winced as feedback screeched through the speakers. I'm done here, Samuel said, his voice ice cold. I came here as a professional. I came here to talk about my work and connect with your audience. But I'm not going to sit here and be insulted by someone who doesn't have a fraction of my experience or my talent. Michael's face twisted with fury. Fine. Leave. Run away. That's what people do when they can't handle the heat. Samuel turned to face him one more time, and his voice was so calm it was terrifying. The heat? I've handled more heat in one day on a film set than you've experienced in your entire career. I've worked with the best, learned from the best, and become one of the best. And nothing you say, nothing you do, will ever change that. The only person who should be embarrassed right now is you, because the whole world just watched you disrespect a guest on your show for no reason other than your own ego. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He just stood there, his face purple with rage and humiliation, as Samuel turned and walked toward the exit. Sam, wait, one of the producers called out, rushing onto the set. Please, we can work this out. We can... But Samuel kept walking. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. He simply headed straight for the door, leaving behind a studio full of shocked faces and a host who had just destroyed his own credibility on live television. Michael stood frozen, watching him go, finally seeming to realize what had just happened. Samuel, come on, don't be ridiculous. We're just having a discussion here. Samuel stopped at the door and turned around one final time. The entire studio held its breath. A discussion requires respect on both sides, Samuel said quietly. You lost my respect the moment you decided to attack me instead of interview me. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've sat through thousands of interviews, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that this was the most unprofessional, most disrespectful, most pathetic excuse for journalism I've ever experienced. Pathetic? Michael's voice cracked again. You can't talk to me like that. I just did, Samuel replied simply. And you know what the sad part is? You had a chance to have a real conversation with me. You could have asked about my process, my inspirations, my journey. You could have made this interesting and meaningful for your viewers. Instead, you chose to be small. You chose to be petty. And now, everyone watching knows exactly who you really are. With that, Samuel pushed through the door and disappeared from view. The sound of the door closing echoed through the silent studio like a gunshot. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The cameras kept rolling, capturing Michael's face as the reality of what just happened sank in. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. His hands trembled at his sides. The confident, arrogant host from minutes earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by someone who looked lost and small. We're going to take a quick break, Michael finally managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. But everyone could hear it shake. Everyone could see the devastation in his eyes. The director finally yelled, "Cut," and the studio erupted into chaos. Producers were shouting into headsets. Assistants were running in different directions. Audience members were pulling out their phones, already posting about what they'd just witnessed. Michael sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. Whatever he had hoped to accomplish with that interview had backfired spectacularly. He had wanted to seem tough, to ask the hard questions, to prove he was more than just a friendly face. Instead, he had revealed himself to be exactly what Samuel had accused him of being: entitled, arrogant, disrespectful. And the worst part? The whole world had seen it. Meanwhile, Samuel was already in his car, being driven away from the studio. His phone was blowing up with calls from his agent, his publicist, his friends, but he ignored them all. He stared out the window, his jaw still tight, his mind replaying the confrontation. He had tried. He had really tried to keep his cool, to give Michael the benefit of the doubt, to salvage the interview. But some things couldn't be salvaged. Some disrespect couldn't be tolerated. And after decades in the industry, Samuel knew when to walk away. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You okay, Mr. Jackson?" Samuel nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm okay. Just disappointed. I expected better from someone in his position." What he said was out of line, the driver offered quietly. "Way out of line," Samuel agreed. "But that's his problem now, not mine. I said what I needed to say. I stood up for myself. And I left with my dignity intact. That's all that matters." Back at the studio, Michael was in an emergency meeting with the show's producers and network executives. Everyone was talking at once, trying to figure out damage control, trying to decide how to spin this disaster. "How could you let it get that far?" one executive demanded. "I was just trying to push him a little," Michael said weakly. "I wanted to get a real reaction, something genuine instead of the usual promotional stuff." "Well, you got a reaction," another producer said bitterly. "You got him to walk off the show. You got him to call you out on live television. And now, we're going to be dealing with the fallout from this for weeks." Michael buried his face in his hands again. "I didn't think he'd actually leave." "What did you think would happen?" The executive's voice was sharp. "You insulted him repeatedly. You questioned his integrity. You basically called him a sellout on live TV. Of course he left. Anyone with self-respect would have left." The room fell silent as the weight of those words settled over everyone. Michael had crossed a line, and there was no taking it back. In the days that followed, the incident would dominate entertainment news. Clips of the confrontation would be shared millions of times across social media. Think pieces would be written about respect in interviews, about ego, about the dynamics between journalists and celebrities. But in that moment, sitting in that conference room, Michael Strahan just felt small. He had let his ego get the better of him. He had tried to prove something, to show he was more than just a friendly morning show host. Instead, he had proven that he wasn't ready for the responsibility that came with his position. Samuel L. Jackson, meanwhile, would go on with his career unchanged. The incident would become just another story in his long history in Hollywood. Another example of him standing up for himself, refusing to be disrespected, maintaining his dignity, no matter what. Because that's what legends do. They know their worth. They demand respect. And when they don't get it, they have the strength to walk away. The confrontation lasted less than 15 minutes from start to finish. But in that short time, it revealed everything anyone needed to know about both men. One was secure in his legacy, confident in his abilities, and unwilling to tolerate disrespect. The other was insecure, trying too hard, and willing to tear someone down to build himself up. The cameras had captured it all. The words, the expressions, the body language. Every uncomfortable second was recorded for posterity, and anyone who watched it could see exactly what happened. Could see who was in the wrong, could see who handled themselves with class, and who let their ego destroy what should have been a simple, pleasant interview. Samuel never returned to Good Morning America. He didn't need to. He had made his point. He had drawn his line. and everyone respected him more for it. Michael, on the other hand, would spend months trying to rebuild his reputation, trying to explain away what happened, trying to convince people that he wasn't really like that it was just a bad day, that he had learned from the experience. But the truth was already out there. Millions of people had seen who he really was when the cameras were rolling and the pressure was on. They had seen the entitlement, the arrogance, the complete lack of respect for someone who had earned every bit of their success, and they wouldn't forget it.